Welcome back to Crossover Commander, where we show you how to take your favorite pop culture characters and cross them through the blind eternities so that they can command your deck with style. I'd like to send a huge shout out to my patrons, Deface and Zephyr at my Adept tier, and then Nitron and my new patron Matachu at the Knight tier. Matachu, your deck will be coming here as soon as I get the time to do it. Thank you guys so much for being my patrons. Moving on to the deck, let's go. Let's kick this portal into overdrive, shall we? Riddle me this. I am always around but unseen. I am often avoided but never outrun. I could find you at the end of the road or even the next corner. What am I? Let me introduce to you the Riddler. For 2, a blue and a black, this legendary human wizard says, whenever you cast a blue spell, exile the top card of target player's library. Whenever you cast a black spell, exile the top card of target player's library. Your opponents can't cast spells with the same name as a card exiled with the Riddler. What can end a game by turn 3, but efficiently concludes by turn 10? I can start a war or end one. I can give you the strength of heroes or leave you powerless. I am a friend to commanders and a foe to fools. What am I? Used to threaten, used to defeat. Sometimes it grows, sometimes it shrinks. Used to conquer, used to protect. It marks your downfall, it marks your success. The true god of war, the creator of mess. What is it? This is the perfect time to remind you that this is a crossover themed build. With that being said, crucial cards for the theme will be added regardless of price. Cards that are not essential to fit the theme will be made as budget friendly as possible. On our horizon is the mana base for this deck. We have Command Tower, Reliquary Tower, Myriad Landscape, and Inventor's Fair. Mist Vault Bridge, Dark Water Catacombs, Dimir Aqueduct, and Choked Estuary. As well as Talaria West, Fetid Pools, River of Tears, and Drowned Catacombs. To round it off, we have Sunken Hollow, Temple of Deceit, 12 Islands, and 10 Swamps. Then our ramp packages Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Dimir Signet, and Mind Stone, as well as Darksteel Ingot, Dimir Locket, Commander's Sphere, and Dimir Cluestone. And to finish it up, we've got the infinite mana potential of Basalt Monolith and Rings of Bright Hearth, as well as Gear per Orrery and Gilded Lotus. These two ladies can help knock out this prize fight. We've got Query for a blue and a black. She says, for 1 blue and a black, whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere this turn, that player loses 1 life. And for 2, a blue and a black, target player puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. And then Echo says, for 2, a blue and a black, Flash, if an opponent would draw a card except the first one they draw on each of their draw steps, instead that player skips that draw and you draw a card. And if they don't bring it in, our Goon Squad will. The Riddle Keepers. For 2 and a blue, they say whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, that creature's controller puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. And then we have our Riddler Bot Assembly for 6 generic mana. They have flying, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control no Riddler bots other than Riddler Bot Assembly, return Riddler Bot Assembly to its owner's hand and create 5 1/1 colorless Riddler Bot artifact creature tokens with flying. The Riddler has been able to convince some of Gotham's other rogues to join in his victory this evening. We have Scarecrow, Fear Manifest for 3, a blue and a black. This legendary nightmare horror says Scarecrow Fear Manifest gets +1/+1 for each card your opponent owns in exile. And whenever Scarecrow or another nightmare or horror enters the battlefield under your control, target opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a land card. And then we have Clayface. For a 2 blue and 2 black, this legendary shapeshifter has hexproof, and whenever a creature card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you may have Clayface become a copy of that card, except its name is still Clayface, and it's still a legendary in addition to its other types, and it has hexproof in this ability. And then we have Killer Croc, the Risen Deep, for 3, 2 blue and a black. This legendary creature has Island Walk and Swamp Walk, and whenever Killer Croc deals combat damage to a player, you may cast target instant or sorcery card from that player's graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that card would be put into a graveyard this turn, exile it instead. And then we have Hush. For a blue and a black, whenever Hush deals combat damage to a player, that player loses 1 life and mills a card. Then you gain 1 life and scry 1, and whenever you attack, you may pay 2. If you do, target creature can't be blocked this turn. The answer to that little riddle is of course twofold: time and draw. To that end, we have Brainstorm for a blue. It says draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. Then we have Whispers of the Muse for a blue. It has a buyback of 5 and you draw a card. And then Compulsion for 1 and a blue says for 1 and a blue, discard a card from your hand and draw a card. Or for 1 and a blue, sacrifice Compulsion and draw a card. And then for 1 and a blue, we have Arcane Denial. It says counter target spell. If its controller may draw up to 2 cards at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep, and you draw a card at the beginning of your next turn's upkeep. Then we have Folio of Fancies for 1 and a blue. It says players have no maximum hand size. And for X and an X and a tap, each player draws X cards. Or for 2 and a blue and tap, each opponent puts a number of cards equal to the number of cards in their hand from the top of their library into their graveyard. And then Howling Mine for 2 generic mana says at the beginning of each player's draw step, if Howling Mine is untapped, that player draws an additional card. And then Limdol's Vault for a blue and a black says look at the top 5 cards of your library. As many times as you choose, you may pay 1 life. Put those cards on the bottom of your library in any order, then look at the top 5 cards of your library. Then shuffle your library and put the last card you looked at this way on top of it in any order. And then Mask of Riddles for a blue and a black says equipped creature has fear, and whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. Then we Muddle the Mixture for 2 blue. It says counter target instant or sorcery spell, and you can also transmute this for 1 and 2 blue to discard this card and search your library for a card with the same converted mana cost. And then we have Dictate of Krufix. For 1 and 2 blue, it has flash, and at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. And then Fabricate for 2 and a blue says search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. And then Perplex for 1 a blue and a black says counter target spell unless its controller discards his or her hand. And this one also has transmute for 1 blue and a black. And then we keep the clues going with Trail of Evidence for 2 and a blue. It says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you investigate. And Word of Invention for X and 3 blue. It has Improvise. Search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost X or less, put it onto the battlefield, and shuffle your library. And then Windfall for 2 and a blue says each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. And then Clutch of the Undercity says for 1 2 blue and a black. Return target permanent to its owner's hand. Its controller loses 3 life. And then for 1 a blue and a black, you can transmute this as well. Then we have Diabolic Tudor for 2 and 2 black. Search your library for a card and put that card into your hand, and then shuffle your library. Fun side note. Back a while ago in the comics, the Riddler was possessed by a demon. Fun facts. Then we have Masterminds Acquisition for 2 and 2 black. It says search your library for a card and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Then Acquire says for 3 and 2 blue, search target opponent's library for an artifact card and put that card into play under your control. Then that player shuffles his or her library. And then Confirm Suspicion says for 3 and 2 blue, counter target spell and investigate 3 times. Then we have Contradict for 3 and 2 blue. It says counter target spell and draw a card. And then the Staff of Nin for 6 generic mana says at the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card. And you can tap it to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. And then Null Profusion for 4 and 2 black says skip your draw step. Whenever you play a card, draw a card. And your maximum hand size is 2. And then Mind Unbound for 4 and 2 blue says at the beginning of your upkeep, put a lore counter on Mind Unbound, then draw a card for each lore counter on Mind Unbound. And then Peer into the Abyss for 4 and 3 black says target player draws cards equal to half the number of cards in their library and loses half their life. Round up each time. Now, fun interaction with Null Profusion. If you play a card after it that says you have no maximum hand size, the drawback of this card is completely nullified. The answer to that riddle is simple, of course. It's your opponent's deck and their victory. The more they want to share it with us, the more it will slip through their fingers. We start with Mind Game for 1 blue. And a buyback of 2 and a blue. It says tap target artifact, creature, or land. And then Brain Freeze for 1 and a blue. It says target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, and it has Storm. And then we have Confounding Conundrum for 1 and a blue. When Confounding Conundrum enters the battlefield, you draw a card. And whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, if that player had another land enter the battlefield under their control this turn, they return a land they control to its owner's hand. This will make sure those pesky green decks never get quite out of reach. And then we have Time Sieve for a blue and a black. You can tap it and sacrifice 5 artifacts to take an extra turn after this one. This combos perfectly with our Riddler bots. Then we have Dramatic Reversal for 1 and a blue. Untap all non-land permanents you control. And Strionic Resonator for 2 generic mana. It says for 2 mana you can tap it, copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. And then we have Isochron Scepter. For 2 generic mana, it has Imprint. When Isochron Scepter enters the battlefield, you may exile an instant card with converted mana cost 2 or less from your hand. And then for 2 generic mana, you may copy that exiled card. If you do, you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. And then we have Siphon Insight for a blue and a black. Look at the top 2 cards of target opponent's library. Exile one of them face down and put the other on top of that library. You may look at and play the exiled card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell. And then it has a flashback of 1 and a blue and a black. And then we have Drown in the Loch. For a blue and a black, it says choose one. Counter target spell with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. Or destroy target creature with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. Now, all of these cards combo extremely well, not only with the Riddler, but with themselves. For you see, with Isochron Scepter and Strionic Resonator, you can exile 2 cards onto the scepter. And exiling Dramatic Reversal and one of the others will mean that either your opponent has no board, can never cast a spell, or loses their library. Very, very sneaky. And then we have Imp's Taunt for 1 and a black and a buyback of 3. Target creature attacks this turn if able. And then we have Mind Crank for 2 generic mana. Whenever an opponent loses life, that player puts that many cards from the top of his or her library into his or her graveyard. This will combo perfectly with Query. And then we have Jace's Eraser for 1 and a blue. Whenever you draw a card, you may have target player put the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. And then Psychic Corrosion for 2 and a blue. Says whenever you draw a card, each opponent puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. And then we have Sphinx's Tutelage for 2 and a blue. It says whenever you draw a card, target opponent puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. If they're both non-land cards that share a color, repeat this process. And then for 5 and a blue, you draw a card, then discard a card. And then we have Teferi's Tutelage. It says when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, then discard a card. And whenever you draw a card, target opponent mills 2 cards. And then we have Teferi's Puzzle Box. For 4 generic mana, it says at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player puts the cards in his or her hand on the bottom of his or her library in any order, then draws that many cards. This combos perfectly with Echo from earlier. And then we have Slaughter for 2 and 2 black. It has a buyback of 4 life. And it says destroy target non-black creature. That creature can't be regenerated this turn. And then we have Breath Stealer's Crypt for 2 and a blue and a black. It says whenever any player draws a card, he or she reveals that card. If the card is a creature card, that player pays 3 life or discards the card. This will not affect us nearly as much as it will our opponents. And that is just how the Riddler likes it. Now that we've answered all the riddles, we can check out the average price and the stats of this deck. At time of release, it's between $187 and $228, depending on where you purchase from. As always, if you are willing to play with heavily played or damaged cards, that price can be cheaper. And then the stats are 11 ramp, 10 tutors, 22 card draw, 18 forms of interaction, 0 board wipes, because your enemies aren't going to have much of a board to speak of most of the time, and 36 lands. Remember, this is a crossover themed build. With that being said, crucial cards for the theme were added regardless of price. Cards that were not essential to fit the theme were made as budget-friendly as possible. If you want to optimize this list, feel free to leave your upgrades in the comments section below. Most importantly, this deck is meant to be a new and engaging way to spice up your Commander games, so fun is the top priority. Thank you for watching this crossover deck tech. If you liked this video, check out our other content on YouTube or TikTok. Your viewership means the multiverse to the crossover Commander, and if you would like to become a part of this growing Terran reality, you can like, share, and subscribe. If you would like to vote on the next pop culture character to crossover, check out our Patreon where we have some awesome perks. If you have any ideas or complaints, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. Now that this portal's closing, see you next time.